your content makes sense. Like, let me just say that up front because I know that you worry about that. You worry, like, does this make sense? Am I clear enough? Am I articulating this in the right way? Is this going to land? And I'm here to tell you your content makes sense. But the problem is that it's so freaking bland. It is so blah. And I don't, like, I'm not saying that to be a bitch. I'm not trying to be Cruella de Vil in terms of content, but I say that because I see this pattern everywhere. And it's part of why I have a really hard time scrolling through content because I'm watching smart, batty, brilliant women creating perfectly logical, well structured content that no one remembers 5 minutes after they read it or listen to it. No one remembers it. No one feels anything from it. So when I start like digging into why, I always find the same answer because I look, this is going to be a very interesting episode, but I look at people's content and even when I don't feel something from it, I ask myself, why am I not feeling something from this? What is the problem here? And it's almost always very, very much in my face. These women are operating on autopilot when it comes not just to their content, but also like in their life, which is crazy. And when I say on autopilot, what they're missing is they're not actually thinking about what they're thinking about. So I just told you, when I find a piece of content where I'm like, that's so blah, I ask myself, why is that blah? What about this is blah? That is, I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about. I'm not just saying, oh, that's blah. Let me scroll past it and find something that, gives me a dopamine rush. I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about. I'm aware of my awareness. I'm disrupting my own patterns. But when these women are creating content, they're just creating and they're not starting to, they've been creating content without metacognition, which I know that that's like a big sciencey word. Okay. I am somewhat of a nerd. I'm somewhat of a geek and I've been studying metacognition and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the thing. This is it. And when you are creating content or living your life without metacognition, it's like driving a car and closing your eyes and not looking at the road. That's literally what it is. You're going to probably get somewhere, but you don't know where you're going. You don't know why you're going there. You don't know what's going on. You're just going. So today in this episode, I want to talk about metacognition and we're not going to be like super sciencey. We're not going to talk about what you would read on Google if you define this or like the textbook definition. I want to actually have a conversation around the real lived practice of thinking. I even have an example about what you're thinking about so that you can create content that's going to really matter. So it's not even now just like, okay, we've talked in the last few episodes about getting visibility in your content. That is very important. Now, when you add a message or you start to articulate certain things, how do you become this woman in your content where she is actually creating content that makes impact? So for example, yesterday I created a post about my sister. And this post that I created about my sister, I was actually a guest on a podcast and I was listening to my podcast episode as I was getting interviewed. And they asked me a couple times about me and my sister. And, we used to have a podcast together and all these things. And I was talking about the story that I've always talked about where I feel like I've lived in the shadow of my sister. My sister is a star. She's an icon. And as I'm listening to this podcast episode, I'm literally like having contractions, like physical. I'm like, ugh, like that story is so, I don't know, like it just doesn't feel good anymore. And so I paused the podcast. I'm like, why do I feel that way? Like, why am I feeling that way? Because before that story used to feel very true for me. But even when I used to tell it before, it felt like, but don't feel bad for me. I'm not a victim. Like, what a great shadow to live in. Like I would always say stuff like that. And so I thought about that yesterday before I posted this piece of content. And I thought to myself, like, oh, that's not my story anymore. Like I've graduated. I'm closing the chapter on that. That's not my story anymore. I've done what I've had to do to make that not the thing that is going to define me anymore. And so then I created a post on that thought. That was the thought. So instead of me saying in my content, this is what most people would do. If you had that realization and you weren't present, you weren't metacognitive, and you still had that thought, but it didn't like super surface for you, it didn't come to the surface for you, you might create a piece of content that says, You need to step out of people's shadows. You need to find your own voice. You need to do this, this, and this so that you can become your own person and finally liberate yourself, or like whatever the F people do. Okay. That would not have landed. But when I created this piece of content where it was truly on my present moment truth, the amount of DMs, the amount of texts even that I got from people who consumed that piece of content telling me they then went and called their sibling because it made them feel something. And they're like, I need to go call my older brother, my older sister, my two sisters, like whatever. The amount of messages I got, that piece of content made impact. That is what we're doing here. Okay. So here's what's happening. You sit down to create content and you immediately think to yourself, like your brain goes to these questions. First one, how does this tie into my offer? Like, how do I make this make sense tying into my offer? Does this align with my brand? Will this make sense to my audience? Am I being clear enough? How do I articulate this? And those are not bad questions, but they're not the right questions. They're not bad, but they're not the right ones. So when you start there, you are basically like you take away all creativity and you start to become like this engineer, and you end up performing. You try to create something that checks all the boxes, and you're not actually going inward and asking the right question, which is, what is true for me in this moment? And what am I actually wanting to share right now? And that is the problem. Most women don't have the ability to witness in real time what is true for them in the moment. They cannot capture the idea the second that it lands for them and then turn it into real life magic. You are having the ideas, but you're struggling with capturing it and being real about it. So what you do is you wait, and then you overthink, and then you look for inspiration from someone else on how to make this make sense. And then you need some direction instead of using your own creative intuition combined with the metacognition. So the result of that is that your content starts to feel like a freaking commercial, dude. A commercial. I hate commercials. You probably hate commercials too. I don't know anyone that loves commercials except for at the Super Bowl. You create content that is actually copyable, probably because you maybe even copied it from someone else, or like ChatGPT helped you. Like ChatGPT cannot get into your heart and into your mind and pull out what you're actually thinking. So you create really bland content, and it evokes no emotion. So yeah, you are making sense. That's not the problem. You're making sense, but you're not making impact. So let me define metacognition the way that I understand it. I just love saying the word metacognition. Say it with me. Metacognition. Don't you feel smart? Okay. Metacognition is the ability to think about what you're thinking about, to become aware of your awareness, to challenge certain autopilot reactions that you might have, or even like streamlined thought patterns. It's basically like you being a pattern disruptor in your own brain. And Tony Robbins actually talks about this, is like being a pattern disruptor is a superpower. And then being able to articulate that disruption is what I would call a superpower. I don't know, I just made that up. But it's the difference between thinking about your content and thinking about how you're thinking about your content. Let me say that again. The difference between thinking about your content and thinking about how you're thinking about your content. So let me give you an example. Thinking about content, again, would be, what do I post today to make a sale? Or what do I post today to get a ton of likes? Whatever your goal is, ton of views, followers, whatever. Thinking about how you're thinking about content would be, what is happening in my life? What is happening in my heart, in my real experience that I could tell a story about to create impact through my content by being truthful? Do you see the difference? And this does not require you to go out and like live this crazy, super entertaining life. I think that's another misconception that people think like, oh, well, I have a boring life, so I can't do this. False. I'm a homebody and I create really badass content because I have metacognition on my side. One of those is very transactional. So what do I post today to make a sale? Very transactional, actually pretty selfish if you ask me. The other one is extremely transformational. You're also like transferring power through the transformation. And the transfer of power is what's going to make you a really strong leader. So again, one of those is surface level. The other is so much rooted in your truth. One of these is like you creating content that is performing, and the other one is creating content that resonates. If you don't know what the word resonate means, resonation, go look it up. That is what you need. You need to become resonating, not relatable. You need to learn how to resonate. Here's the thing. Metacognition, and I talk about this theory all the time, but metacognition is the answer to documenting versus performing. Being able to document versus perform. And I'm not talking about documenting your entire life. We do this in a way where it's smart content and it positions you as a leader, as the obvious choice. Because when you document things, you're not trying to engineer something, and that is felt. You're witnessing what's real for you, and you're translating that into your content. But most women can't do that because they've never been taught how to observe their own thoughts without judgment. Instead, they've been taught to overanalyze, to criticize, how to, you don't know how to notice your patterns without getting lost in your head. It becomes hurtful and paralyzing for you if you try to do this. So instead, you can't go there. You default to being on autopilot, and autopilot creates forgettable content. You are going to become forgettable, and I know you don't want that. So how do you know when you're creating content with metacognition? Here is something that I notice. When you don't have metacognition, you really don't seem present in your content. You're using high level, vague stories, and maybe you're not even telling stories at all. Or you recycle what somebody else is doing because you don't know how to locate your own inner voice and translate that into content. That is just a practice, by the way. It doesn't have to feel hard. So your content is making sense, but it feels like a commercial. It feels very boring. It's not evoking any emotion. There's no depth to it. And at the end of the day, this is not me hating on you, because what I'm actually telling you is there's no you in your content. You are not in your content. You're creating copyable bullshit instead of unique, brilliant content that would match your true inner power. And there's a cost to this. Why am I out of breath? I just don't know. Maybe I need more coffee. Coffee is always the answer. Okay. The cost to this is in your business. When you're not creating with metacognition, your content is not going to perform well in terms of visibility or conversion. So two different goals. It's not going to perform well with either of those goals. So then you're going to constantly feel like you need to outsource your means of growth. You'll start to consider paying for ads. You'll start to rely on sales calls so that, people can just get in front of you in real life, because at that moment when they see the real you, they like you. Do you see where this is going? You're asking to be a guest on podcasts or speak on stages because you can't build your own audience. You want to take someone else's. You want to put yourself in front of someone else's audience. Nothing wrong with that, except for when that is the go-to and you don't have the ability to build your own audience. Energy-wise, if you continue to create without metacognition, content is always going to feel hard for you. You're not going to like it. It's not going to feel fun. It's not going to feel liberating because you don't have full control. You don't have full autonomy over what you're creating, and you're always looking outside of yourself for the answer. When it comes to your identity, let's talk about that. You'll feel like you're never creating content that's actually yours. It'll feel like borrowed, or it'll just feel lifeless because you're looking to be inspired by someone else or whatever that may be. You're just always one step removed from your truth. And I'm going to be a little harsh here. I mean, I've been kind of harsh this whole time, but I'm going to take it there because this needs to be said. A lot of this comes down to laziness. You're being lazy. Not in the you're not working hard enough. I know you're a hustler. I get it. You run through brick walls. It's not that you're not working hard enough, but more so being lazy in the fact that you're not willing to do the deeper work of going inward and witnessing what's actually true for you. And there could be a reason for that. Maybe you're afraid of something. I don't know. But I know you want this. I know you want to grow. I know you want visibility. I know you want to take over. I know you want to be a thought leader. I know you want to be a well-respected, empowered woman. It's easier to recycle someone else's content or someone else's thought pattern. It's easier to use ChatGPT or to follow a template that someone else created. It's easier to operate on autopilot, to be honest. But easier, and you already know this, I'm just reminding you, that's not going to build a freaking empire, a legacy. It's not. I don't care like to have these hacks that make me a ton of money overnight. Like I'm over that, dude. I'm over it. That's like TikTok Shop. Go join TikTok Shop. I'm not hating on TikTok Shop, by the way. But like we're building legacy here. The moment that you have legacy, you could sell anything. Anything. I watch this happen all the time with women who have these cult-like communities because they were willing to be raw and real and truthful and be themselves. And that doesn't always mean vulnerable, struggling stories, okay? Like let's not get this confused. They have metacognition. So they built legacy building communities that they now at this point could sell anything to. They don't need a huge launch. They don't need to do the most. People buy from them because they are who they are and people know who they are. So when we talk about what metacognition actually looks like in practice, I'm going to give you some questions that I ask myself when I'm creating content to make sure that I'm staying in line with what I preach. The first question is every single piece of content that I create there's a story. Okay. Even if there's hardly any words, there's always a story. I'm a storyteller. And in order to be a storyteller, I ask myself this one question, which is, am I keeping the story about the main character? Whether that main character is me, my client, or my ideal client, I'm making sure the story centers around them. Not the external event, not the circumstance, the person, okay? There's always a hero in my stories. Then I ask myself, is my content achieving my why? And my why is never make money. My why is always, I want to help women confidently speak and express themselves creatively from their heart, build their empire so that they can change the world for the better with their genius, with their brilliance. That is my why. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. A byproduct of that is definitely making money, but that is not my why. So I ask myself, does this piece of content achieve that why? And even when the content is about me, I can still answer that question. Then I ask myself, am I proud of what I'm sharing? That's a huge one. Not asking myself, is this good? Is this going to do well? Is this going to perform? But am I proud of this? Do I like this myself? Then I ask, what is my intention for this post? That's something that I feel like a lot of people are missing. You have no idea what your intention is for the post other than I want to make money. What do I want to expect to happen as a result? Knowing the intention would help you answer that. And it forces me, I guess these are my questions, to get clear on the outcome that I'm creating for. So instead of just throwing content into the void, hoping that it works, throwing it at the wall, please stick to the wall. Like I'm very clear on the outcome that I'm creating for. And there's different outcomes for every single post. Every single post has its own job. The next question is, how can I share vulnerably? And sometimes vulnerably is bragging. Like, let's just be real. As women, like we're not comfortable with humbly bragging or talking about how good we have it. So that can feel vulnerable. Vulnerability has been like this term that's been twisted into always thinking it's a sad story. That's not vulnerability. It can be. But how can I share vulnerability as a lesson that I've learned? That's the question. Because when you talk about vulnerability without the lesson, you become like this word vomit, venting, sad story. So with a lesson without vulnerability though is just teaching. So you see how like the two go together to create the transformation. Then I ask, am I leading by example? This is one of my core values. It's very important to me. Would my ideal client want to trade places with me based on what I'm sharing? And if not, what needs to change? What needs to shift? And then I ask, would I like my own content? Guys, please, for the love of the Lord, ask yourselves, do you like your own content? Because this is huge. If you wouldn't engage with your own content, why would anyone else? And how I know when I'm in a pattern of thought that's not serving my content is when I start to think to myself, this feels hard, or like I'm trying too hard here. I'm not excited about this. I'm in a rush. I'm only trying to make money or convert. I'm confused by my own content. If any of those things are true for me, I quite literally pause and I go back to these questions, which I don't have on a list anywhere. I just know these questions innately at this point. So if you want to write down those questions and practice that, go for it. Filter your content through it, but eventually you won't need them. So there's a huge difference between when we talk about like metacognition, which is basically self-observation, you're observing yourself. There's a difference between that and then self-criticism, which I touched on a little bit already. And this is where a lot of people, especially women, get very stuck in this. Self-observation is just that. It's an observation. It is not charged. It's very neutral. It is not a judgment. It's stating a fact, okay? It also comes with progression. One of my favorite leaders, this was from years ago, and I don't even know this human anymore, that we don't cross paths, but he said, the only point of life is to be a human that has progression. And I loved that. That stuck with me forever. So self-observation, in my opinion, comes with progression. It comes with growth. It comes with curiosity. What a virtue of life, by the way, curiosity. Like, get more curious and ask the questions like, okay, I notice I'm trying to force this. What's actually true for me right now? Or, okay, I notice that I'm in a rush. What would happen if I just slowed down for a minute? Or, okay, I feel like I'm confused by my own articulation. What clarity am I avoiding? That's a good one. Okay, self-criticism, on the other hand, the opposite of self-observation, that would include blame, shame, embarrassment, regret, victimization, like self-deprecating. You're going backwards instead of forward. So things like, I'm terrible at this, or I can't ever get this right, or why am I not as good as her? Like, I don't know, whatever the fuck. But do you see the difference? Metacognition is not another tool for self-criticism. Please, 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 please. It's a tool for self-awareness. And I have this whole formula on the elevated woman, which in my opinion, in order to like become this thought leader, both in your content and in real life, the elevated woman requires self-awareness. It's the number one step, by the way. Self-awareness is like required for pattern disruption and for growth. So if you find yourself using metacognition to beat yourself up, just take a pause. That is not the practice. You're doing the wrong thing here. All right, I want to go into like a client story about what metacognition looks like in action. Okay, so a real life example. I recently had a client who wanted to speak on the Epstein files. Like, am I even allowed to say that? Feels not good. Okay, so her story was that she grew up in, like, she had an abusive experience in her childhood, which led to eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and other battles. And I know that that's heavy, but that's what she's built her brand on now. She's making impact on women that are healing from those things. So she faced abuse, sexual assault from men who were supposed to be trustworthy. All these things happened to her in her life. So when the Epstein files became a current event, it was triggering for her. And she sent me a voice message and she said she wanted to talk about how awful this situation was because it was triggering for her. It like brought up, it like was like a can that opened up a lot of feelings, and she wants to fight against it naturally because she doesn't like it. So she wanted to share what it was bringing up for her, basically. There's nothing wrong with this, by the way. But she also mentioned in her voice message that she felt like this was a no-no, and that's what she was asking me about because she's been told, like, as leaders building businesses, we're not supposed to talk about politics or whatever. Okay. I have so many thoughts on this. But I did respond to her and I said, I don't necessarily, even as like a content and brand strategist, I don't fall in line with those rules. And I don't encourage my clients to either, but I'm not over here saying, yeah, go talk about politics. That's not the goal. That's not the message. I believe there's a way to go about speaking about things that you're passionate about from a leadership lens in an elevated manner for it to actually make a difference. So I asked her in response, what's really coming up for you with the situation? Like, okay, yes, we would all agree this is a terrible situation, but tell me the truth underneath all of this for you. Like, what's actually coming up? And she was very vulnerable, very honest. And she sent a voice message back and she said, I get angry that there are evil men making women feel small and incapable and less than. And those emotional type of attacks manifest into the physical for women through childhood and adulthood. Like, they don't go away. And things happen, like they eventually want to starve themselves or potentially develop binge eating disorders. They hate their bodies because they just want to be smaller. Like it impacts them so much in a bad way. Okay, so I sent a message back and I said, all right, so making this story, again, remember, there's a main character of every story. Making this story about the files is actually bringing more attention to the demons that you're trying to mitigate. Okay? It's okay to mention the files. It's okay to mention this situation, but remember, you are the main character here. You are the streamlined through point. And if you bring this up, how are you going to use it to actually create change rather than just bring more attention to it and talk about it and express your uncanned emotions? And that's not what she wanted to do. That's why she brought this to me. So I wasn't like telling her, I can't believe you want to do this. Okay. I was coaching her through this from a perspective of, if this is something you want to talk about, you got to talk about it. But here, let's do this in a way where it's actually creating more positive change versus just bringing attention to something just to bring attention to it. So together, we crafted a very honest, true story. And there was dialogue, like there was multiple back and forths between the two of us via voice message. And she was then able to share about it, that started with a hook mentioning the files. And then the rest of the story was about her and how she's healing in the midst of all of this happening and triggering her and all of this coming up for her. And she was able to be vulnerable, present, and like make this have a positive impact spin on it from something that's so terrible. That is metacognition. And she's not faking the impact, you guys. She's not sitting there thinking like, oh, how can I be the hero for people who are dealing with this? That's not it. She's getting honest and noticing, I want to talk about this external event, but then asking, what's the real story? What's my story? How do I center myself as the main character here? How do I create impact with this and not just talk about it to talk about it? That is what I'm talking about here. So how do you start practicing this for yourself without feeling overwhelmed? Because I know you're probably like, where do I go from here? And the last thing that I want you to feel is paralyzed by this. So before you post anything, before you create your next post, just take a giant pause and ask yourself maybe like 3 simple questions. And the first one is, what is actually true for me right now? Not what should I say, what makes sense, but what is true for you right now? And then number 2, when you figure out what is true for you, when you go to put that and translate that into your content, are you still the main character of the story? So it's even like, and I'm going to digress for a minute. When people want to talk about how they've been hated on, for example, like they've been hated on, or they received hate messages, hate comments, like whatever, and they make the entire story about the people leaving the hate comments or the hate messages or the hate. It's like, dude, you're giving them exactly what they want. Like you're giving the people, the haters, the attention when this story is not about the haters, it's about you. So yeah, you can mention that you have haters, but like, what are you doing with that? And so when you have situations like this and you're like, okay, I can see where I'm becoming not the main character. How can you make it about you? How can you make it about your journey? How can you make it about a lesson that you're learning in your life that no one else knows except for you because it's in your heart? And then the final question is, in a year from now, when you look back on this post, will you be proud of it? Or if you have kids, for example, when they see your content, are they going to be proud of this when they're older? Not a matter of, is this going to get engagement? Like there's a lot of people that take current events that are awful and they manipulate the system. They use it to their advantage to get engagement versus being truthful. And I hate that. It's like, you can sense that, you can smell it. It's like, ugh, it's so yucky. So again, not will this get engagement and get views and comments and followers and attention, but will you look back on this and feel good about what you shared? The second piece of this is training yourself to start capturing your ideas the moment that they come to you. This is like content intuition. That's what I call it. Content intuition. You have way more micro specific ideas than you think you do. So you're over there like, how do I get more specific? Like, am I making sense? How do I say this? You innately know, but you let them slip away because you're not paying attention. So when an idea lands for you, when you have a thought, a realization, or like this moment of clarity, write it down immediately, whether that goes into your notes app in your phone. I have like a running Google Doc. I also have a notebook with me at all times. I write it down and I just like quick little note. And then I don't like let it sit there forever. I act on it quickly. It's literally within the next 12 hours, I'm creating a post with that idea. I don't let it sit there and build up my library of ideas. That doesn't help anyone. I also don't overthink it. I capture it and I create from that. Okay. The warning is there is a risk of too much metacognition. So this is a perfect segue off of everything I just said, because now that you've learned about metacognition in relation to your content, I don't want you to overdo it. And the way that you know that you overdo it is if you realize like it's paralyzing you. If you spend more time in your thoughts versus putting it into your content, that's when you know you've gone too far. Metacognition is like the gasoline, the fuel to the action. It's not supposed to replace that. Okay. So what do you have to look forward to? Like when you master this skill of metacognition, of self-observation, you are never going to have to convince people that you're a leader ever again. They're just going to innately know. They're going to feel it from you. They're going to know because of the way that you express yourself. You're also going to start calling in a higher caliber of client, the person who's not just looking for the quick fix, but they want to meet you halfway. They want to respect you as the leader. They want to do the work. They want to get the results, and they know that that's going to require them taking action. You'll also create uncopyable content. Like say goodbye to I was going to say your shit. And then I was like, I can't swear, but then I think I've already sworn a couple times in this episode. So here we go. Your shit is going to be uncopyable content that is so uniquely yours. No one else could replicate it, even if they tried. You're going to also have fun creating content. That's my favorite part, because it's not going to feel like something that you just have to do, something that feels like you're not good at it. It's going to just become expression. You're never going to run out of ideas. As long as you are alive, as long as you are breathing, as long as you're living, you're going to have ideas, material for content. You're also going to feel very proud of what you're posting and creating and putting out there. And that pride, that is what builds your cult-like community that everybody wants. Because people can feel when you are proud of your work, when you're excited about what you're doing. And that feeling is contagious. Look around, guys. Anyone that you know that has like this big online community of people that are obsessed with their work, I mean, honestly, like you can feel the energy from them. And this is how you do this. You're also like, get ready. You're going to have more eyes on you, and the reason for that is because you've become like refreshing in a sea of autopilot zombie creators. Like it feels like everyone's content looks the same. This is how you separate yourself. And what happens in your business, your brand, and even like the way that you lead your containers and your clients, they become obsessed with your work, not just your content, obsessed with your work, obsessed with the movement that you are building. And you also will become a more present leader who starts to see each client as an individual versus like handing them resources and templates and go fix this and then come to me. And just be like, I mean, this is what you originally wanted. You're going to become more articulate in not just your content, but in your coaching, which will create better results for your clients. Now imagine, because of all of this metacognitive talk, you start becoming a better coach, your clients get better results. Now you have results to talk about in your content. How fun. You won't need external validation because like on anything, because you're going to be creating from your own truth. And when you can create from your own truth, the confidence is insane. The conviction is insane. And all of that is going to lead you to this business that is so sustainable, so yours. Ultimately, because it's rooted in who you are, not what you think you should be. Let me say that again, because that's like a mic drop. If I could drop my mic, I would, but it's like totally glued to my desk. You're building a sustainable business that is rooted in who you are, not who you think you should be. Whew. That was longer than I wanted it to be, but just to summarize, like metacognition is not just this content strategy that you're going to start doing and turning on and off when you want to. It's a way of being, it's a way of living. It's the practice of becoming aware of your awareness, of thinking what you're thinking about, disrupting your own thought patterns so that you can create content that actually changes people's lives, actually matters, actually serves people. The moment that people feel served and taken care of and nurtured from your content is the moment that they're locked in forever. And yes, this takes massive balls, massive courage, because it's going to require you to go inward. And sometimes that's really ugly. Sometimes that's really hard to witness what is true and to stop performing and to just express. But that, like I said, that courage leads to confidence, like real confidence, the kind that you don't need validation of anything. Okay. So today is the day that you turn off being on autopilot and you start truly just thinking about what you're thinking about. And watch what happens, sister, when your content finally becomes a true reflection of who you are. You close the gap between who you are in your leadership and who you are with your clients and who you are in your content. It starts to match. And that is my favorite thing to witness. So if this was helpful for you, please slide in my DMs. I just want to know if you enjoyed this. And if you're listening to the podcast, it just means so much to me. So slide in my DMs, let me know, holla at me, and I hope you have the best day ever. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Love you.